In the shadowed corridors of power, where empires once thrived, a single crack can echo through centuries, signaling the slow unraveling of authority itself. Picture marble halls filled with confident decrees, vast bureaucracies humming with the illusion of permanence, only for the ground beneath to shift without warning. Governments on the brink of failure have haunted human history, not as sudden disasters, but as intricate processes of erosion where strength turns to fragility. From ancient thrones to modern capitals, the pattern repeats with chilling familiarity, drawing us into worlds where stability was taken for granted until it vanished. The air thick with unspoken fears, leaders clinging to facades while the foundations groaned. These moments reveal how even the mightiest systems can teeter on the edge of oblivion. Throughout the sweep of civilization, governments have risen as beacons of order amid chaos, promising security, prosperity, and unity to their people. In the vast expanse of the Roman Empire at its zenith, aqueducts carried fresh water to teeming cities, legions patrolled borders stretching from Britain to the Euphrates, and emperors wielded divine authority from gilded palaces. Citizens awoke to the rhythms of markets bustling with traders from distant provinces, forums alive with debate, and temples echoing with rituals that reinforced the state's eternal glory. Daily life pulsed with routine certainty, farmers tilling fertile lands under imperial protection, artisans crafting goods for global trade, families gathering under roofs that symbolize the Pax Romana. Yet beneath this veneer of invincibility, invisible fractures formed, as over-reliance on slave labor strained resources, distant wars drained treasuries, and administrative corruption seeped into the veins of governance like a silent poison. No one understood what was coming next as early warning signs flickered in the periphery of power. Inflation gnawed at the currency, debased coins losing value while prices soared, forcing emperors to impose heavier taxes on an already burdened populace. Provincial governors grew distant and self-serving, reports of unrest dismissed as fleeting anomalies. In the countryside, once productive estates fell into neglect, roads once safe for merchants became shadowed by bandits, and the silence of abandoned villages spoke volumes. Urban centers, swollen with migrants fleeing hardship, simmered with inequality, where the elite dined on imported delicacies, while the masses queued for dwindling grain rations. These were not dramatic upheavals but quiet dissonances, the kind that leaders rationalized away, convinced that tradition and military might would hold the line indefinitely. As tensions mounted, the air grew heavier with instability, a palpable shift that ordinary people sensed in their bones. Economic pressures mounted as barbarian incursions tested overstretched frontiers, forcing desperate conscriptions that pulled young men from fields and families. Political intrigue festered in the capital, with assassinations and short-lived emperors creating a revolving door of leadership that eroded public trust. Social fabrics frayed as class divides deepened, religious schisms challenged state orthodoxy, and whispers of reform met with resistance from entrenched interests. Citizens went about their days under a sky that seemed to darken gradually, markets less vibrant, conversations laced with caution, the once reliable machinery of state sputtering under the weight of accumulated missteps. Key decisions born from hubris or desperation accelerated the descent. Emperors chose lavish building projects over essential repairs, pursued endless conquests that yielded diminishing returns, and elevated favorites whose incompetence further hollowed out institutions. Alliances fractured as neighboring powers exploited weaknesses, while internal factions prioritized personal gain over collective survival. In later echoes across history, similar patterns emerged in revolutionary France, where monarchs ignored the pleas of starving peasants, or in the twilight of the Soviet Union, where rigid central planning ignored mounting inefficiencies and public discontent. These choices, made in ornate chambers far removed from the streets, compounded pressures until the system could no longer absorb the strain. The moment the system begins to fail arrives not with a thunderclap, but with a cascade of breaking points, subtle at first, then undeniable. In Rome, the sack of the Eternal City by Visigoths in 410 AD shattered the myth of invulnerability, as smoke rose over the Seven Hills and panic gripped the forums. Supply lines collapsed, legions mutinied or deserted, and the intricate web of taxation and administration, unraveled overnight in some provinces. Citizens huddled in fear as familiar routines dissolved. Bread shortages turned to riots, and authority figures fled or were overthrown. The collapse did not begin with total chaos. It began quietly with the failure of basic functions. The inability to enforce laws, collect revenues, or protect borders, revealing how fragile the edifice had become. Human consequences unfolded in waves of profound social breakdown, where fear replaced order and survival trumped loyalty. Families were torn apart by famine and migration. Once thriving communities reduced to ghost towns, littered with ruins. Violence erupted in the vacuum, as warlords carved out fiefdoms, and disease spread unchecked through weakened populations. The psychological toll was immense, with chronic uncertainty breeding despair, innovation stifled by scarcity, and cultural treasures lost amid the turmoil. In the streets, the sounds of daily commerce gave way to desperate bartering and the wails of the displaced, while elites barricaded themselves in villas, watching their world fracture. These ruptures reshaped identities, forcing people to navigate new realities, where the state no longer provided the promised shield against the unknown. Across different eras, the long-term historical impact of such governmental failures reverberated far beyond the immediate crisis. The fall of Rome ushered in the fragmented Middle Ages, where feudal structures emerged from the ashes, preserving fragments of classical knowledge while birthing new forms of governance. In other cases, like the collapse of imperial China's dynasties or the dissolution of European colonial empires, power vacuums invited revolutions that redrew maps and ideologies. New powers rose, lessons were selectively learned or ignored, and societies rebuilt with both scars and innovations. Yet the cycle persisted, proving that no government is immune, as economic mismanagement, environmental strains, and social fractures repeatedly tested the limits of human institutions. In the Weimar Republic of the early 20th century, hyperinflation turned savings to worthless paper, eroding faith in democratic governance and paving the way for darker forces. Daily life before the brink involved bustling cafes and intellectual ferment in Berlin, but warning signs of reparations burdens and political polarization went unheeded. Rising instability saw street battles between factions, key decisions like excessive money printing sealing the fate. The system's failure brought economic despair, social fragmentation, and eventual authoritarian takeover, with human consequences including mass unemployment and ideological extremism that scarred generations. Its impact reshaped global politics, reminding how brinkmanship can ignite wider conflagrations. Even in more recent memory, governments in Latin America and beyond have danced on the precipice, where oil-dependent economies crumbled under mismanagement, corruption siphoned resources, and protests filled plazas with demands for accountability. The patterns echo ancient precedents: over-centralization, denial of realities, and failure to adapt. Citizens experience the erosion firsthand, from empty shelves to unreliable services, as invisible signs like debt accumulation and elite detachment built toward rupture. These episodes highlight the universal vulnerability, where the machinery of state, once oiled by complacency, grinds to a halt under pressure. The reflective weight of these histories lingers like a ghost in modern halls of power, urging vigilance against the same complacencies. What feels solid today, the institutions, the policies, the assurances, carries the seeds of potential fracture if left unchecked. Sensory echoes persist in ruined amphitheaters and faded monuments, where wind whispers through empty arches, evoking the routines that once filled them with life. The silence after collapse speaks volumes about human resilience and frailty intertwined, as survivors rebuilt amid the debris, forging new orders from old mistakes. Yet the haunting truth remains that every government exists in a delicate balance, perpetually on the brink if it loses sight of its foundations. Environmental shifts, demographic changes, technological disruptions all test the adaptability of leaders and systems. In the quiet moments before visible failure, when markets still function and streets appear calm, the astute observer detects the subtle dissonances, the growing disconnect between rulers and ruled. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes in the language of hubris and neglect. As we stand in our own era of rapid transformation, the stories of fallen governments serve as mirrors, reflecting possibilities we dare not ignore. The fear in the eyes of citizens watching their world transform, the weight of decisions made in isolation, the long shadows cast over future generations, these elements weave a cautionary tapestry. No empire, no republic, no federation stands eternal. Each carries within it the potential for irreversible rupture. When pressures accumulate beyond repair, the process of governmental failure teaches that collapse is rarely total annihilation, but a painful metamorphosis, where old structures yield to new experiments in power. From the Byzantine remnants preserving Roman law, to post-Soviet states navigating independence, adaptation emerges from the ruins. Yet the human cost, measured in lost potential, fractured societies, and cycles of violence, demands reflection on how to sustain legitimacy and responsiveness. In the end, the brink is not a distant historical artifact, but a perpetual condition of governance, demanding wisdom, foresight, and humility. The sounds of marching legions fading into memory, the empty thrones gathering dust, the resilient voices of survivors calling for renewal. These images endure. They remind us that civilization's greatest achievements rest on foundations that require constant care. Lest the brink become the fall, reshaping the human story once more, in ways both tragic and transformative.